Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take an in-depth look at Capcom's Street Fighter VI and see how it compares both visually and from a gameplay perspective to the previous entry to the series, Street Fighter V. For this analysis, both games are being played on a PlayStation 5, with visual settings tweaked to remove effects like film grain and motion blur in order to capture cleaner still image captures for comparison. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first discussing the fighters themselves. Now obviously, Street Fighter V, having been available since 2016, offers significantly more fighters to play with now, with over 40 different characters to choose between, many of which are iconic characters from throughout the series' long history. At launch, however, Street Fighter V's selection was far more limited, with only 16 fighters, and many classics like Blanka, Honda, and Guile having been omitted. Of the initial 16 characters, only 4 characters are new to the series, including Fang, Laura, Necalli, and Rashid. Street Fighter VI, on the other hand, has launched with 18 fighters, and includes many more classics right off the bat, along with 6 brand new fighters as well. Characters like Rashid, Ed, and Akuma have been confirmed to be releasing sometime later this year, along with another new character called AKI. Though it's unclear at this time whether the game will push past the impressive 40-plus large character roster of the previous game. As for the characters that are shared between either game, we can already see several big changes, both to their core design and the overall art direction of the game itself. The Street Fighter series has always strived to deliver an almost anime-like artistic direction, with exaggerated physical attributes to accentuate both the power and beauty of its diverse characters. Characters in the 5th game exhibit some of the most exaggerated features in the series yet, with each male character sporting some insane muscle definition, while female characters are often in very tight clothes with massive thighs and quite a bit of lift. The general design of each character is very much designed around the iconic look and appearance of these same characters in previous entries, maintaining the same clothing, coloration, and even the same general fighting stances fans have fallen in love with. Though, thanks to the improved capabilities on the PS4, the models are much more detailed, with some nice soft shadowing and direct light really drawing out those exaggerated details in a way that makes the characters pop on the screen. Street Fighter VI seems to be doing things a bit differently, not only reinventing iconic character designs, but also further distancing itself from the series' more cartoony appearance, due mostly in part to the advancements in lighting and other rendering capabilities. Take Ryu for example. In Street Fighter V, Ryu's wearing his iconic torn karate gi, with a very worn and dirty appearance to it, along with large red fingerless boxing gloves, and a red headband. Because of the game's unique shader style, Ryu's exposed arms have an almost painted appearance to them, with deep, shadowed lines greatly accentuating each muscle. In Street Fighter VI, however, Ryu is now shirtless, with a tattered red cloak tied diagonally across his shoulder. He's now wearing sandals, his pants are much cleaner, and feature a higher resolution texture as well. Because of the game's somewhat more realistic art direction, the old paint stroke look has now been replaced with more advanced shader and texture work, allowing things like muscle fibers and veins under the skin to appear over top of the bicep itself. Ryu's face also sports a full beard now, along with much more realistic hair rendering, turning what previously looked like a twisted high-top hairstyle into a hairstyle more consistent with the character himself. This same style of hair rendering can be found across most of the male characters in the game, with individual hairs being more clearly defined, and contributing to a far less cartoony appearance. Though, just like other games using Capcom's RE engine, there is a very noticeable shimmering effect to the hair that doesn't look great when rendering at lower resolutions. And it sometimes looks worse than the more stylized hair that was used before, though it's definitely on a case-by-case basis. Moving on from Ryu, we have Ken, who has also opted to wear shoes this time around, and has chosen to wear a long coat over top of his traditional red pants and black shirt. Ken also now sports a short goatee, along with a sort of Owen Wilson-looking haircut, and has had his facial geometry modified slightly to give him a more masculine appearance. But one of the bigger changes is to his stance animation, that's been toned down slightly to reduce the amount of bobbing he's doing between each leg, while still maintaining a similar style. Chun Li's more traditional chi pao, spiked bracelet, and the silk brocades adorning her ox horn hairstyle have all been removed or replaced, with a light blue dress that has smoother shoulders, rounded, non-spiked bracelets, and only a yellow ribbon tying her hair. Like Ken, Chun Li has also been given a more adult appearance to her face, aging her up considerably over the almost teenage look of the previous design. Cammy's redesign similarly tones down on the more sexual appearance of the previous model, reducing her breast size and giving her an outfit that's much more grounded and believable. Her long dual braid has been scrapped in favor of two long straps that extend off of her blue leather jacket, and her fighting style, while still one of the faster ones in the game, has been reimagined slightly to make her more of a street brawler. Juri has also been given a brand new outfit that ditches the Bond villain look of the old design and replaces it with a punk rock style, with baggy pants, a loose-fitting top, and exposed arms and abdomen. Her animations have also been slightly modified to give her a more natural look, with less exaggerated balancing and a completely different crouch stance. Then we have the heavyweights like Handa, Zangief, and Blanka that have all seen some pretty drastic redesigns in this latest entry. Blanka in particular is almost a different character altogether, with far less hair, a reduced green hue coloration, and a new set of animations more akin to that of a gorilla or a chimpanzee, even going as far as featuring an extended lower lip. Handa looks mostly the same as before, though, like Ryu, his muscles have been reduced in size and definition, and his head size seems to be smaller relative to the rest of his body. Zangief demonstrates one of the better uses for the new hair rendering techniques, as the thick chest hair that previously appeared as a solid object before now feels like it's properly integrated into the character itself, and is also used to provide a new angled shape to his long beard. Like Honda, Zangief's muscle size and definition looks to have been toned down to feel more realistic, and instead of his classic wrestling briefs, he's now wearing tight-fitting nylon pants that really accentuate the game's updated lighting design. Guile, for the most part, remains the same as before, with his new overalls replacing the security officer look from before, along with many of the same visual enhancements shared by the other characters. Though it's Dhalsim who's changed the most between games, as his movement and combat animations have been completely reimagined, ditching his floaty, single-leg hopping animation from before in favor of this more fluid, slow creeping animation in Street Fighter 6. His arms are also moving in a constant circular motion, giving him a very hypnotic and even more unusual movement style to coincide with his very unique stretching abilities. Overall, when it comes to the fighters themselves, Street Fighter 6 definitely seems to be aiming for a somewhat more realistic art direction with each of the redesigns, toning down the exaggerated physical attributes of each character, while still maintaining recognizable elements like color schemes, iconic features, and general fighting styles. Street Fighter V, on the other hand, was much more faithful to the original designs of these characters, and because of its cartoony aesthetic, it's possible that it will age much better in the long run, with the only downside being its obviously lower resolution and lower quality anti-aliasing methods. Next up, let's take a brief look at the stages themselves. Now, unlike the characters, there aren't any actual stages carried over from the previous game to compare directly, as most of the stages currently available in Street Fighter 6 are brand new. And again, because Street Fighter V has had the benefit of multiple expansions since its 2016 release, it currently offers far more variety with its stage selection, with more than twice the number of stages currently available in Street Fighter 6. However, Street Fighter V's initial offerings were pretty slim compared to the newest game, with only 11 base maps back in 2016 compared to the 16 available in Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter V eventually received 5 expansions, each offering several new locations to coincide with the additional fighters, including many reimagined classics from the old games, along with a set of special limited-time Pro Tour stages that don't seem to be available otherwise. Each stage is beautifully detailed, with lots of matching background NPCs doing various cliché things relative to the location, and depending on the action happening in the foreground, some NPCs will even react accordingly, stumbling backwards and cheering on the fighters after a heavy-hitting combo. Some objects will even shatter and spill out onto the ground, and can even be used for flashy finishers if the player beats their opponent nearby. Street Fighter VI's stages share a similar design philosophy, with many NPCs in the background, either cheering on the fight or doing their own thing, and several interactable objects in the background that help add more weight to each fight. While the environments themselves aren't the same between games, there's still a few of the same types of environments being utilized here, like the fancy Chinese restaurant, the dirty alleyway, and even some homages to classic stages like an aircraft carrier and an Indian temple. Comparing the general design of the stages feels a bit too subjective, as a lot of it just boils down to preference, but we can at least acknowledge the much improved visual quality of these newer stages, with far more interactable objects, higher quality NPC models, and much higher fidelity texture work that really helps to bring these locations to life. I really appreciate the great color tone variety used across each of the environments, as this helps set each of the locations apart in a big way, and plays into the game's new colorful visual effects that I'll discuss more in a bit. Street Fighter VI also introduces a uniquely large environment separate from the traditional stages, thanks to its World Tour mode, that sees players exploring large open-ended hub areas around the world, where every sidewalk and alley can be turned into a potential arena for combat. These areas aren't necessarily groundbreaking in the grand scheme of things, but they're certainly a big step for a series like Street Fighter, with a substantial uptick to the amount of objects and details being rendered on screen, along with dozens of NPCs, most of which can be seamlessly interacted with and engaged in combat. Because of its scale, this environment doesn't quite match the quality of the traditional stages, but it's worth mentioning either way. One of the more noticeable improvements to Street Fighter VI's graphical design is undoubtedly the updated lighting and shadowing techniques. Unlike the static, high-contrast appearance of Street Fighter V, Street Fighter VI utilizes much more modernized lighting techniques, synonymous with those used in other RE Engine projects. This includes improved bloom effects, high-fidelity specular effects, and much better light interaction with the character models themselves. 5 does feature some subtle reflective effects, possibly planar reflections on certain surfaces, but Street Fighter VI incorporates things like screen space reflections and improved ambient occlusion that do a great job of enhancing the presentation. And then there's the shadows that are not only softer for the fighters on screen, but are now visible for the background NPCs too, an aspect that was mostly absent in the previous game. Then of course we have the effects, that are a major part of either game's visual presentation. While most of the game's attacks are your standard kicks and punches, they're all accented by bright yellow alpha effects whenever they make impact with an opponent. Like the rest of the art style, these effects have a cartoonish look to them when viewed independently, appearing almost completely flat with very minimal bloom applied. But in Street Fighter VI, these impact effects feel more three-dimensional, with a softer overall appearance and a significant amount of bloom. Light will also reflect off of the character models and environments as well, integrating the presentation together more seamlessly. Meanwhile, environmental effects like sparks and destruction have been scaled up in complexity as well, and help add to the chaos on screen. But the most drastic change made here is undoubtedly the highly stylized new Drive Impact that splatters the screen temporarily with each character's signature color scheme for a really unique and flashy effect. Super attack effects return as well, and are added to further with full background filter changes and additional streaks of paint around each impact, making these cinematic moments feel even more dramatic, whereas the previous game's supers feel much less stylized. Moving on, let's talk about some of the biggest changes that have been made to the gameplay, starting with the general combat mechanics. On the surface, Street Fighter V and VI play almost exactly the same. In fact, many of the controls for characters shared between these two games even match up when using the new game's classic control scheme. The bigger changes instead revolve around the game's more involved mechanics, like how combos, parries, reversals, and other special attacks are initiated. In 5, the bulk of these more advanced combat techniques revolve around V abilities. These include V skills, V reversals, and V triggers, all of which consume sections of a V meter built up over the course of each round. Each of these unique abilities help to further diversify the game's large roster of characters, adding an additional layer of complexity to the game's already robust combat mechanics. Street Fighter VI, on the other hand, seems to drop the V ability system in favor of a new drive system. The drive system feels like it's more complementary to the core combat flow, as they can be quickly initiated depending on the situation to quickly turn the tide in the player's favor. A drive impact, for example, can be used to quickly break through an enemy's defenses and open them up for a quick follow-up attack. Drive reversals and parries, on the other hand, can be used to interrupt an enemy's flow, and a drive rush can be used to quickly close the gap when necessary. The drive meter can also be used to fuel overdrive as well, enhancing attacks similar to how the V meter functioned for some characters before. With the drive system, Street Fighter VI's combat feels much more relentless and fast-paced, keeping players constantly on their toes as they trade drive attacks between combos and other unique special attacks. Special critical attacks, or super arts, are carried over as well, but are now separated by tiers, with level 3 super art attacks being the more cinematic and powerful attacks in the game. By offering 3 different level super art attacks, Street Fighter VI has more combat variety across its various characters, and it'll be interesting to see how this has evolved further as Capcom continues to build on the game's roster. Moving on from the core combat, we have the available game modes. In the most recent version of Street Fighter V, players are given access to a variety of different modes to test their skills. First, there's the arcade, that, as expected, throws players through a ladder of opponents with a chosen character, using only still image cutscenes and voiceover to contribute to the story. This was later added to with the addition of a classic ladder that lets players fight through a curated playlist of classic fights in familiar locations to classic entries in the series, effectively recreating many of the original games. For players looking for a more modernized campaign experience, Street Fighter V also offers a downloadable cinematic campaign that seamlessly swaps between fighters across a globe-spanning story, all animated and fully voiced. It's not necessarily the best storyline, but it's a more interesting campaign experience nonetheless. Street Fighter VI, on the other hand, does not see this type of cinematic campaign return, at least not in this capacity. That's because its main campaign experience is now part of its brand new World Tour mode that has players create their own custom fighter and travel the world, searching for the true essence of strength. It's a lot like the format for the old Tony Hawk's Underground game, with a pair of friends rising through the ranks together, meeting iconic characters along the way, while also forming a very obvious rivalry against each other. Players can even run around semi-open-ended environments and interact with NPCs. Though, for players looking to jump right into the action, this mode can come off feeling extremely tedious by comparison. Thankfully, a more traditional ladder mode is offered as well, though the unique classic ladders from Street Fighter V are not retained, as there's simply not enough stages or characters in this build to even make that feasible. Street Fighter VI also sees some very nice refinements to its competitive online multiplayer, and includes a massive interactive space similar to PlayStation Home, where players can meet up with other fighters, spectate battles, and tune in for bigger events. It's a very enticing option for fans of the series. And aside from some low performance and significant network lag in the game's spectate options, it does feel very well implemented so far. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you feel offers the best audio quality and design?
Hadouken! Hadouken! Shoryuken! Shoryuken! Genjin! Hadouken! Shinku Hadouken! Come on, you! Yeah, let's do it. Now the fight's begun. Not yet. Let us begin.
Don't expect me to be a pushover.
Round 1. Fight!
My turn! Coming in hot! One more! Hadouken! Tatsumaki! Tatsumaki Senpu! Hadouken! Shigota! Hadouken!
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Street Fighter VI looks like it's off to a great start, offering more features than its predecessor at launch, while greatly refining the visual quality and presentation to help set itself apart. The game's new drive impact effects are easily one of the coolest looking effects offered in the game, plastering bright colors across the screen effortlessly to accentuate powerful hits and turnarounds that make for a really interesting visual presentation. The gameplay still remains very complex compared to much simpler fighter games like Mortal Kombat that I'm personally more accustomed to, but I found myself greatly enjoying both of these games, and appreciate the very well-designed tutorials on offer that help ease players into the experience. For players that still find themselves struggling, Street Fighter VI even offers a far simpler modern control scheme too, that helps make the combat accessible with less button combinations needed to perform powerful attacks. Though the classic control scheme still remains the most precise and necessary of the two options, and should be immediately familiar to fans of the franchise. So, what do you guys think? Are you enjoying the new Street Fighter VI, or did you prefer Street Fighter V instead? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this posted every week.